All right, we are going to go ahead and begin. A reminder, as always, that this will be recorded. It's live streamed to YouTube, and we'll also upload a final copy, high-res copy, in the next few days for people who have to leave early or may have missed portions of the webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Derek Cicero, VP of Products here at Luxion. We're very excited to have a wonderful guest host today for our webinar, the one and only Tim Feher from KeyShot Studios. If you don't know already, KeyShot Studios is a wonderful service bureau that we work with very closely. I have a very long history of working with KeyShot and Luxion. They are located in Troy, Michigan, and they offer a slate of services with KeyShot as the focal point, really working from rendering to animation to interactive content and retouching. And so today's webinar is me focused on something that I know they do a lot of work on over there, which is using KeyShot for post-production visuals. So we're to be talking about how to use render passes, render layers, the different ways they use them to set them up for their workflow, the image tab capabilities, and at the end of the webinar, we'll hold off about 15 minutes for some Q&A. But during the webinar, myself and Justin Adams, our head of support, will be assisting me in answering your questions. So if you have questions, about the product, about features, about pricing, feel free to go ahead and answer those in the Q&A, and then I'll save some of the really the meaty questions for Tim at the end for Q&A. So with that, I want to thank Tim for taking his time out today to join us. And Tim, I'll let you kick it off from there.
Thanks, Derek. Hi, everybody. First, I want to thank everyone for being part of this webinar. Days are very busy, so I appreciate you guys taking the time out to view this. As Derek was saying, I'm from KeyShot Studios. We do a variety of work through content creation, from retouching to animations to workflows, and our main software we use is KeyShot. We integrate KeyShot within Photoshop and After Effects, and we use it. We use Maya to KeyShot, Blender to KeyShot, Max to KeyShot. So anything and everything we touch is always with KeyShot, and then the other softwares for any support that we may need. Whenever you guys are bored, if you guys like, go to our website, KeyShotStudios.com. Check out what we are and what kind of work we've done. And so thank you. What I want to go over today is not so much setting up your file for the render, but I know there's always a lot of questions on how do we set up the imagery for post-production. Either it's going to be in Photoshop or After Effects or even Nuke. For that matter. So that's kind of like what I want to go through today. I'm going to start out very basic, and then eventually we're going to build up, and we're going to talk about, I think I already took off the scene. We're going to go and do this scene here and show how I would use the different render layers within KeyShot inside Photoshop. But first, what I want to talk about is, I'm going to pull up a scene here real quick. There's always questions on, we rendered a image out of KeyShot, and then we pull it into Photoshop, and we can't seem to find our background. Background's not there. So I kind of want to show you what you need to do in Photoshop to have that pop up. So I'm just going to do a quick render here. I thought about rendering these pre-rendered, but there's some other things I want to talk about as I go through this, so I didn't want to pre-render it. So we're going to go process queue. It'll take 2 seconds to render. So a lot of times in our situations, we're doing a project, and we render out the image, and it could be a ground shadow, right? The customer or the client, they want a different type of ground shadow. So how do we attack that as a workflow, so we're not wasting a lot of time of re-rendering? So if you have a simple product like this coffee mug, it's not that big of a deal. You can do another quick render, because the renders take only a few minutes, if that, and you can swap out your ground shadow. But let's say you're doing a full scene environment with a car inside. Now that could take an hour to render. for example. Well, how can we get that ground shadow rendered quickly and replaced into our scene? I wanted to talk while that was rendering a little bit. So let me go back to rendering and pulling up your background. So we just got done with the render. We're gonna open up the mug, not that one. Of course. It is. You know, I did test renders. Okay, so we're going to KeyShot 11 rendering. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Well, let me go to here. All right. I don't know what type of backgrounds on this one, but this is how the image comes up, right, in Photoshop. And you're like, where is my background? So the very first thing I do is I actually duplicate the RGB layer. And then I go back to the original RGB. It could be either or, but I always go to the bottom one. If you go to layer inside Photoshop and go to layer mask and click on from transparency, what that does, it gives you the alpha channel on that particular image. And now all you have to do is either turn this off and you'll see your background, and now your background's there, or you can just totally delete that layer mask. So delete layer mask, and now you have your whole image like you've seen in KeyShot with your background and your product on it. Now, the reason why I duplicate it is because I want this mug to be on its own layer. So now I can adjust the background. Just for example, I'm just going to do a level change here. And you can see that now I'm adjusting just the background and I'm not affecting the product itself. So doing it this way, I mean, back in the day, we would have to do renders and then you would cut your product out, and then, because that takes time, you know, putting a mask around everything and then doing these adjustments. So that took time. Doing it this way, it's very quickly, we can get inside the file very fast and start doing our comping. I'm going to get into all the different render layers in a minute, but this was just, we get this question a lot. Where does our background go? So that's how that is fixed, or how we deal with that. The next thing, what I was talking about earlier, is the ground shadow, right? So let's just say this was the image that the customer wanted, the client wanted, and they didn't like the ground shadow. So now we're going to render out this again, but all I want is the ground shadow. I don't want the background. I don't want the mug or anything like that. So let's adjust the background real quick. So I'm going to go to my environmental tab, and I am going to tilt this up, and then I'm going to rotate my dome. So it gives me, and what we'll usually do is have a live session with our clients. So it's in real time. So we can get instant feedback from them, and we can get going on our rendering right away. And KeyShot allows us to do that very easily. We just do a share screen. They can see the lighting right away. So we'll do any lighting tweaks if we have to with the customer. And then we get their approval right away, and we can go into production. Earlier days of when we were doing CG, we would do screenshots and you have to send it to the client. It just takes a lot of time back and forth. You waste sometimes a couple of days before getting an answer. Okay, now that I have, let's say everyone agreed that this is the ground shadow they want, what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the background, because I don't need the background anymore. And then we're also, what we'll do is we're going to turn this whole product into an emissive shader. So if I go to my materials, and what I'm going to do, now depending on the project, I should probably get to this, is KeyShot has these model sets in here. A lot of times, depending on how complex the scene is and if we want to save it after we do this ground shadow, we will make a model set just for ground shadow. So again, we'll just select on our product that we want. We want to create a model set. So we're going to click on Add New Model Set. We'll call it Shadow. And we do not want to link any materials. What happens if you link materials, then depending on wherever this model is and your different model sets. If you have multiple, all your materials would change if they're linked together in the different model sets. We do not want that, so we're going to have that unselected, and now I'm going to say OK. So now that we're going to be doing this, the shadow, I want to make sure my model set is on the shadow layer, because now I'm going to put a new material on this. I'm going to put one material on it. I'm going to turn the whole product into an emissive shader. So now I'm going to double click on here, and that's going to pull up my material tab. Right now it's in paint. I am going to go to an emissive. So far, so good. I do not want to see this in the, I don't want the emissive to see the reflections. I want it turned off to the camera. And right now you don't see anything, but if you select visible in shadows, now we have just the shadow, and we're going to render this for our comp. Another thing that we do when we do a render, a shadow pass, we'll call it, is we turn the background to solid black. And I'm going to show you why. I'm going to do one render in white.
So, hey, Tim, real quick, I'm going to pause you. Some people were asking about sort of the render window there and the render settings. Can you just kind of briefly walk people through kind of your render settings and kind of what you use within that tab?
Yep. Okay. You're talking about this tab here?
Yes, that window. Yeah.
Okay. So 90% of all work that we do, for the most part, we render in samples, max samples, and we really don't go too much more than 128. If we do a render and we find it's a little noisy in the shadow areas, we'll crank this up to about 256. Very rarely do we go over 300. I know that's a question that we do get asked a lot, is how many samples do we do? We find that is a good range. I mean, we can add more samples because we do have the rendering horsepower at our studio, but it comes a point where you're just wasting time, because it's not the improvement that you're getting from the extra samples isn't enough for the time that you're waiting for the render. So certainly that 128 to 256 is what we usually use. When I go to my output, if we're doing still imagery, it all depends on the project, but these are the ones I always have selected. I always do PSD, either 32-bit, 16-bit, or the regular 8-bit. Again, it depends. If I'm doing an image that has light, like we're doing a light fixture and we have to have the light on, I'll do a PSD 16-bit. It just gives you more color space to manipulate the pixels. Or I'll even go into 32-bit, and then you have your full range of depth with that. If we're doing cars or interiors, I'll stick with the PSD. I won't go to the 16-bit, because the more bits you get, the heavier the files are for saving purposes. I always render with an alpha transparency. And when it comes to my layer passes, again, I have used all of these at one point, but for the most part, I always have these four on no matter what. I have reflection, ambient occlusion, clown pass, and normals. With the normals, there's a little cog here. I always select camera space normals. That gives you the nice blue, red, yellow, green tones within this normals map. And then I'm going to be showing you guys how I use this normal map inside Photoshop. Clown pass is great for doing quick masks that you need in Photoshop. Now, if I'm doing an interior, I will use all of these, including lighting and global illumination. Now, the only time you're going to see anything on this global illumination pass is if you have it selected in your lightings tab up here. So if you don't have this checked on, there'll be nothing on this global illumination pass. So this has to be checked on. And I usually put my global illumination at between 3 and 10. And again, it depends on the size of the scene, because those interiors can get very heavy at times. Okay. Going back to this, I'm going to render it on white, and I'm also going to render it on black. And this is how we render our shadow passes. We render it on a black or almost black background. Let me add that in here real quick. Add the queue. And what's really nice, file name is currently queued. All right, I gotta change it. Now, the reason why we do this too is you'll get very fast renders. So let's say you did a full car render. Those renders took, again, an hour, let's just say. And you want to do a new shadow. Well, you don't want to wait another hour. Doing it this way will cut your rendering time 90%. As you can see, this is already almost done rendering. And when we rendered the cup with the background, it took what, about maybe a minute? So we're already through these two renders very quickly. Okay, now that that's done, let's go to Photoshop and see what this all looks like. All right, we're gonna go open. We have the black background and the white. This one that you see on my screen right now is the white background, and this one is the black background. And at first glance, it looks exactly the same between the two. But here's where the difference comes. If I put a colored background on here, let's just put this gray on here, you can see that the shadow, since we rendered this on a white background, it's picking up white pixels from the background, even though it's transparent. And if we go to this black one, we rendered on a black background, and now we put a color background underneath it. Now you're not seeing, there's no white halo around the shadow. So that's the reason why you use the black background when you're doing just a shadow. We'll call it a shadow pass. So now if I copy this and I'm going to paste it inside here, if I turn that off, now the reason why you're seeing, so you can see that we have a new shadow now inside here, and it's just the shadow. So sometimes clients will ask, hey, I want the product on its own layer, I want the shadow on its own layer, and I want the background on its own layer. And on the background, they don't want the shadow embedded in the background. So the background has to be on its own. So this is another reason why we go this route when creating shadows. So that shadow is not inside the background. Now, as you can see here, we still have this piece here from our original render. That is because I haven't done anything to this yet. I have to mask out this coffee cup. Since we rendered a clown pass, we can pick this color with our picker right here, color picker. And now I'm just going to add a mask onto this layer. And that is this little button down here. It's a black circle with white around it inside Photoshop. I click on that. And now you can see that that has disappeared. So when I turn my shadow back on, now we have just that shadow. So I know that's a lot of explaining for just a ground shadow, but I thought it's important to show this so you guys possibly could try that in the future. So there we go. So that's the ground shadows. So let's talk about, I'm going to pull up this scene here. Now there's all kinds of stuff happening in here. We have a lot of different parts. Obviously, we have some nice lighting with shadows. We have plants. We have glass. We have, you know, all kinds of stuff. And we want to be able to do any post work very quickly once this is done rendering. So what we do is we use We go, we will use, if you click on this main scene, you'll see that there's render layers, that you can assign parts to a render layer. So when you render it, KeyShot takes all that information. It will create render layers, so just your different parts. You can render out different render passes, and they put it all in one little nice package for you as a PSD, so you can move quickly once you're done rendering. So when I'm doing this scene, let's say this particular shot was the customer is selling the patio set, right? So we want to make sure that is our focus. And you can see I have a depth of field on here. With the depth of field, you certainly want to use render layers instead of the clown paths for selecting parts. So what I've done is, what we're going to do is, this patio set is broken down into multiple files. So we have a pot, we have just the table on its own, we have the chairs and the drinks on top, right? What I want to do is put each one of these in its own render layer, and it's very easy to do. All you need to do is click on the node. It doesn't have to be a node, it can be a part too, but I have these in a group. So I pick on a group, and then under properties, you'll see render layers. You want to click on new render layer. I usually name it so I know what these render layers are. That's the bowl. This looks like it's the table. And again, I'm just going to select another one. I'm going to hit type in table. So here's what's nice about this. If I select on this bowl, you'll see that this is highlighted. So that's telling me that this bowl is on this render layer. If I select on the chair, it's telling me that this is not in a render layer whatsoever. So that's a nice way to go and see if you have something on a render layer or not. It's by just clicking on the part and then looking in here to see if it is on a render layer or not yet. Okay, so let's do the chairs. And you can do this as much as you want, as many layers as you need. And we'll do the glass. So now that we have that, when you render it, you're going to render PSD. You want to make sure in your layers and passes that not only do you have the passes that you want rendered along with this, you also want to have this render layer selected. As long as that's selected, these will render out as their own render layer. If it's not selected, then they don't come in the PSD. And I also strongly recommend that you always add everything to a PSD. Otherwise, everything's going to be rendered out and you'll have a bunch of images inside a folder, and then you'll have to put them all together yourself in Photoshop. So we're going to pretend that we rendered this, and I'm going to go into Photoshop. And you'll see here that we have render layers. If I turn that on, I'm going to turn this off. Here are all our different render layers. Looks like I forgot to put something on when I did this. Here's the bowl. Here's the table. Here's the chairs. And as you can see, it cuts out around whatever's in front of it. Here's the cups or glasses, and then I added another one in here, some foliage, or the yucca plant. Also, when I rendered this, I rendered every single render layer possible in KeyShot. So if I go back to here, I had all these selected because I'm going to go through all those right now and show you what I would use those for. So I have rendered a clown pass. There is a raw pass in here. You have labels, ambient occlusion, your shadows, refraction. Refraction is anything that's glass. You have your reflections, so that's all your specular on your parts. Caustics, if there were any. I didn't have caustics selected. I never render with caustics. GI, that is your global illumination. So you can see it's very faint, but once I apply this, you'll see how it brings a little bit more life to the image. We have a lighting layer, and then we have a diffuse, and we have this beautiful normals map, which is going to be fun. And then this is the original render. So here's our render. I'm ready to go into some post-production here. First thing I'm going to do is I take the reflection layer. I'm going to move that down so it's above your RGB. I'm going to turn that on. Now, as you can see, everything is really dark, and the only thing you're seeing are the lighter pixels. You know, we'll say 50% and above. What do I need to do to apply that to my RGB layer in Photoshop? Now, this goes for inside Photoshop. This goes for After Effects. This would go for if you're in Nuke. So this process is the same. What I want to do is get rid of all the black pixels and just leave the lighter pixels. And so if you have that selected, you go to your, I forgot what they even call this, but we're going to go to shoot, I forgot what you call this, but I'm going to go to screen, for example. Now you can see that all the black is gone, and the only thing that's left is the lighter pixels. So if I turn this off, it's very faint, and I turn it back on, you can see how it gives me a little bit more light and a little bit more sheen on my parts, right? I'll turn it off, turn it on. It's very faint. Some renders you'll have more, some renders you'll have less. It all depends on how much specular you have on your part you've created. So that's the first thing I do. Next, I will usually take my GI, if I have one, and I apply that on top of my refraction or my reflection. I'm going to turn that on. And again, this is a very dark layer. So I want to go into this section. You're going to be either using lighten, screen, color dodge, linear dodge. Lighter color doesn't do anything for this, but these are the ones you're going to use. And there's no right or wrong. It's whatever you feel is needed for the image. So if I use screen, and I'm going to turn this off, you're going to see how the scene lightens up a little bit through this area. There's a little bit of green tone to it too. I want a little bit more pop to that, so I'm going to see what color dodge does. So if I go back to screen, these are very subtle moves, but these subtle moves, many small moves make a great image. It's a lot of times it's the little details that make the image. Not the big movements that you see. And then we have color dodge. So if I turn that off, you can see that this is kind of grayish, and I turn that GI with the color dodge, and now you got a little bit of ambient color, global illumination hitting your parts. So if I zoom out, that's what that one's for. Next, which is probably the most important one personally, is this ambient occlusion. So I'm going to turn that on. Now this one's a little different. This one's mostly white with black tones throughout. This is what's going to help your image set your product into the scene. So right now it's on normal. We want to move this into this section. So if you want to leave the blacks, you want to work in your darken, your multiplier, your color burn, your linear burn, or your darken color. So you want to be in this ROM, this section of these. So I'm going to go to multiply. And what that does, it gets rid of all the white pixels and leaves just the darker pixels. What does that do? So if I turn it off, right now, like these parts on this table, they feel like they're floating. So I would, if I didn't have this pass, I would have to go in here and start cutting out these cups and start adding a little bit of weight and shadow underneath all these to make them sit in there. Now that I have this ambient occlusion pass from KeyShot, I'm able to use that instead. And now that I turned it on, you can see now we have a little bit of shadow setting the product or the parts onto the surface. So I'm going to zoom out. with it off, you can see actually through here on this wall, there's steps to this wall, right? So there's ledges. You can't really see that there's a change of direction right here. But if I turn that ambient occlusion on, it gives you a faint little line. And sometimes that's all you need to say, hey, there's a change in direction of a part. Now that that's on, you can still manipulate this. You don't have to be at 100% opacity. Let's just say you thought this was too heavy on here. You can go in and then just take down the opacity of that layer, and now you can adjust. Let me zoom in here so you can see a little better. You can adjust the intensity of that layer. If I go all the way to 0, it's back to where it was. Now I'm going to add a little bit more occlusion. You can fine tune that to where you feel. It's all subjective of what you feel looks right. I also want to say that I am not a Photoshop expert, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. This is how I use these layers. I'm sure there's other people that use these differently, but I've found, and our studio found, that this works best for us and we're able to move quickly. I just wanted to put that out there. Okay, now that we have that on top, let's say we want a little bit more shadow. And again, just because these render layers are rendered doesn't mean you have to use them, but I'm going to use them all just so you can see what they do. So here's your shadow pass. This is showing you all the different, your nice hard shadows. So let's just say you wanted in your image, you really wanted to make some of the shadow areas a little bit deeper. That's when you would use this pass. I'm going to put that on top. Turn it on. Okay, we want to keep the dark pixels. So that means we want to be in this section. We want to go to multiply. Now that's like super dark. You're like, oh my God, that's just terrible. That's really nasty looking. That is okay, because that is where we are going to add another layer on top of this. And that's going to be what I use mostly is the levels. So I'm going to select levels. And then I'm going to connect this level to just this layer. And the hotkey for that is you hold down your Alt key and you select between those two layers. Now this level will only affect the shadow layer down here. Okay, now that we're in here, I am going to increase the white all the way so you can see what's going to happen. So now I want to increase just a little bit more shadow. So I am going to move this over, and you can see that we're starting to get a little bit darker and it fades out to where it was. And that's what I want. I don't want the whole thing to be dark. So if I turn this off, the whole thing is dark. I want to have a little gradation to the shadows that I'm adding. And I'm controlling that with this levels slider here on the white. All right, so let's just say that is kind of where I want it. So this is before, and this is after. And you can see it just darkened the seats underneath the table a little bit more. They would probably be pretty dark under there, and how with the lighting that's here. And then we have nice gradation of dark to lighter going across that way. So that's what the shadow pass is for. Another one that we use a little bit is the lighting pass. Looks like, hey, what am I going to do with this? I don't want to use the dark pixels off of this. I just want to use the lighter pixels. So again, that is selected. I go into could be sheen, could be color dodge, might be too much, could be your linear dodge. I'm just going to pick linear dodge. What I really like what's happening is this area down here, how it's lighting up. It's giving more of that sun glow to this image. Now, that doesn't mean I have to use this whole piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tone it down a little bit, because this layer, this lighting is blowing this all out back here. It looks very flat. But I do like what's happening in this corner of the image. So now that I have that where I want it, I'm going to put a mask on there. And I'm going to color that mask pure black. Hotkey is Alt Delete. So now that mask is black, so this is not affecting anything on this image, but I want to pull out just this section of it. So I'm going to go to my gradient, and all I'm going to do is add a little gradient here, and we're just going to add a little bit of that light. So this is before, or this is before, and then this is after. It has giving you a little bit of feel. More light coming in, sunlight. Excuse me. Refraction. So again, only time you're going to have anything on your refraction pass is if you have glass in there. Since we do have glass, I'll put this on. We want to get rid of the black pixels. So we're going to be into this section. So pick one of them that you like, and then you just got to move it down, or the opacity down, until you have an area that you like. There's really nothing else here. The diffuse I'm not doing anything with. The caustics, we don't have any. There was no labels on here, so I don't have a labels pass. And then this raw render, again, I don't need it for anything, so I'm not going to use it. But the other two passes that we do use a lot is this normals pass, and this is going to be a fun one to go through. And then we also have a clown pass. What is the clown pass used for? That is used if we want to do adjustments to certain areas of the image. So KeyShot renders out your image, and it also assigns a flat color to that image. We call it the clown pass. And with that, you can select your parts very quickly and easily. So let's say we want to manipulate the black around the table. All I got to do is, you have the clown pass selected, go to your selector tool in Photoshop, you click on it, and it selects just the blue. Now, I can go in here and do whatever Photoshop that you like to do. Let's say we do use curves, and we can adjust the curve. We'll say we'll make that brighter. Now I'm going to show you what that looks like. So it selected just this from that clown pass. So this is a very quick way of picking regions out. Now that you have all this here, let's say I want the front of it light, but I don't care about the back side. Again, not a big deal. In Photoshop, we can take this render layer, or this alpha, we'll call it, and we can just take out what we don't want out of it. So if I go back to this, we don't want to do that. There we go. So you can see now where I got rid of on this mask, I got rid of it through here. Now you can see we are only seeing this area. So that's going to be, I don't want to go through all that. That's not what this is for. But you can manipulate these masks too. So that's nice. These are quick ways of selecting things. As you can tell on this image, I put a depth of field on this image. So when we do a depth of field, we use render layers a lot. The reason for that is these render layers now, when it renders, let me turn that off. When it gives you that render layer, it also applies the depth of field to it. So when you look at this chair in the back, it's very fuzzy, right? So this is going to give me a true selection of the part. The clown pass, while this is there, since there's a depth of field, it's actually mixing pixels. So it's mixing the blue and this greenish yellow color. And it's mixing those two colors together because you have a depth of field, a Gaussian blur to things, and it's mixing it through here. So the clown pass, while you can select the blue, it doesn't always select everything that you need to make an adjustment. So I'm going to select this off of the clown pass. Let me turn this back on. And I'm going to just do an adjustment just to show you. So I'm going to crank it up. So you can see that I have a line going around here. So a couple ways of fixing that is when I select this, I enlarge my selection, then I put a feather to it, and then I apply it, and then I have to do some Photoshop to blend the two together. We found an easier way is that since we rendered the chairs on its own render layer, whereas the chairs right here, I'm going to select that. I'm going to make another layer and show you that it blends the edges a little bit better. So now when I do that adjustment, you can see it blends right in there because it's picking up all the different pixels off of that render layer. So that's with the render layer. This one, if it shows us, hold on, sorry. And that is using the clown pass. So clown pass is great when you don't use depth of field in your imagery. But when you start using depth of field, that's when we would transfer over and put things into render layers. How do we know what we want in a render layer? Well, it all depends on your project, right? We're assuming that this project is all about the patio set. So I would make sure I have my patio set in its own render layers. So when I do my adjustments, their product is most pristine in the image. So that's what the render layers are for. And then we also use render layers when we start doing animations. And I'm going to show you that in a moment too, but let's go over this, this normals pass. You know, a lot of times you're like, what do I do with this thing? Now there's different ways of using this pass. I'm going to show you the way I use it. And again, there's multiple ways of using it. I find this works best for us and for what we need to be done. So let's just assume we're losing shape of the table and the black legs, right? So I want to add light to the front surface here where the light's coming in at. If I use this normals pass, I can select that. So what you need to do is I want to select just the table. So I have that in a render layer. So I'm going to select my table. As you can see, I got the ants going around it. On my normals pass in Photoshop, if you go up to select color range, you're going to have this dialog box that pops up. You have fuzziness and you have range. Okay. What I'm going to do is I want to pick these pink pixels, right? So I'm going to select on that. And as you can see here, depending on where I select, this window changes. So if I pick the green, you're seeing the green pixels selected. If I pick the blue, you're going to see the blue pixels selected. I want the pinks. With that, you can change the range of it. Right now, you can see everything is selected that's pink. Well, luckily, we only selected this table, so only the table area will be selected. But I want to show you this range. You can actually tone that down so it's only picking in that area. And you also can take the fuzziness. I wish Photoshop would make these windows bigger because they're really hard to see. But the fuzziness you can also crank down so you only have this area of what you're wanting selected. So let's just pick that, and I'm going to say OK. And what's going to happen is it's going to give me a selection of that range that I've selected. So I'm going to turn this off. And now I am going to use a adjustment layer. We'll just go into levels. And I want to increase the brightness of that section. So I'm going to increase it. And now you can see as I am just adjusting this section of the table. And to show you what the mask looks like, that's the mask that it created from that normals pass. So we add a little bit more light there. We can also do this normals pass. I'm not going to have anything selected. I am just going to do the whole scene as a whole. So nothing is selected. So I am going to go to select, color range, and let's pick like this purple area of this bowl. I am going to increase my fuzziness. So everything you see in white is what's going to be selected. Now, the whiter it is, the more pixels it selects. The darker the white, the less pixels. So you get that gradation with the selection. So I'm going to hit OK. You can see all kinds of stuff were selected off that. Turn that off. And you can do any adjustment layer. I'll use curves this time. And we can increase the brightness, darken a little bit. So that is some, we use this a lot because you can do some really quick selections and adjustments to your image. So with that off, you know, could be a little bit hard to see in this area. Maybe you want some more light to hit this chair because the sun is coming in hotter. You turn that on, you can brighten that chair up a little bit. Now that you have this, let me show you what this looks like. It looks like that, just like we've seen in that scene. This can be your friend in post-production. All right. Okay, so that's the Photoshop side. And again, I'm showing you large sections where you would use these techniques, even if you wanted just this chair. You can use any of these techniques and apply it to just the chair by using the clown pass, or if you have it as a render layer, use it as a render. You can select it through the render layer. Right? So the render layers are really powerful when it comes to animations and After Effects. So let's pop this After Effects open. And I've already rendered out a scene. I'm going to open up the scene right now. So we go to animations. I render everything in Photoshop file format. I'm going to select on my first frame or any frame within that stack. I'm going to import. After Effects is going to ask me how do you want me to import this? We want to do footage, and I want to choose layers. I don't want to import the whole PSD because there's some layers that I probably will not be using. I just render them just in case, and that just makes your After Effects heavy. So I do everything individually. And again, this is the way I do it. There's multiple ways. So I'm going to choose a layer. What I always choose first is my RGB because that's my final render. I'll select RGB and hit OK. And now I want to put this into a layer comp. So I'm going to slide this over the film. And now I have this here. Wait for it. There it is. I have this animation inside After Effects. What do we do? How do we, for example, I already knew offhand when I was doing this job that I'm going to have to adjust the casing of this camera. When I rendered this, I put the casing on its own render layer. So now what I'm going to do is add that render layer to my timeline here. So again, I'm going to double click. Let me make sure this is on pause because I notice I'm lagging. There we go. I'm going to select my my Photoshop. I want to do footage. I want to choose a layer, and that layer is called shell. I'm going to hit OK. Now you can see here, I rendered it out as a whole, but I had the shell as its own render layer. So now I can use this either as an alpha inside After Effects, or I could use it as a render layer. So I will do that right now. I'm going to add that to this scene here. If I turn off my RGB, I have that render layer inside here. So now I can either on this shell go and add an adjustment. I'll just do a hue and saturation, and it's just going to affect the shell. So now when I rotate this, I'm adjusting just the shell. So render layers are very powerful when it comes to the animation and working in After Effects or Premiere or Nuke. You can use these layers to help with your comping inside these softwares. So that's one way of using that render layer. Another way you can use that render layer as a alpha. So I'm going to add, I'm going to do an adjustment layer. So now this adjustment layer, I'm going to put a colorize. It's adjusting the whole scene, right? The whole thing is red. Man, I just want to adjust the shell of this. If I go into my render layers and pick the shell and put that inside After Effects, I can connect that as an alpha. So I go to create alpha, and now that adjustment is affecting just the shell area. It's kind of cool. I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to use that ambient occlusion to show you that it's just like in Photoshop. Ambient occlusion, I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to put that on top. As you can see, the ambient occlusion is white and black. Inside your mode, I'm going to turn that to multiply because I want to get rid of all white and just leave my darker pixels. I do multiply. I can turn that on and off, and you can see that ambient occlusion pass is being applied to the scene as a whole. Where it really helps out a lot is a lot of times in the cracks of your products, right? So like this power button, it looks fine, but if you add just a little bit of ambient occlusion, it gives you that depth that you need to make it so it really looks like it's recessed in the part a little bit. There's a lot of information here. I understand, and I probably went all over the board, and I was going super fast. But this is really what I wanted to show you guys today, of how powerful all these different render passes are that KeyShot provides you that you can work within your workflow. And again, in Photoshop, you have these render passes. You can make up actions and say, okay, I want, I have actions I use where I render out certain passes. I hit this action that I've created, and it takes my reflection pass. It automatically puts it on as a screen. It takes it down 50%. It takes the ambient occlusion and applies it as a multiply, as an action. So when I open the file in Photoshop, I apply this action. It takes all my layers and applies it, and now I'm that further ahead. That's 5 steps I didn't have to do. So it's a good way to work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tim. You actually answered most of the questions people had kind of as you're going through it. So you did a great job of really kind of hitting all the highlights and working through things. Some folks had been asking, yes, this is recorded. And so this will be posted. You can watch the live stream that you just saw here on our YouTube channel if you want to kind of go back and try things. I would also recommend, we have our weekly quick tips that we put out via our YouTube channel. So you can either subscribe on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and Instagram to get all of those. But we're constantly putting great content out there every week from folks like Tim and our internal team to basically get you as much information as possible on how to really maximize your investment in KeyShot. So a big thank you to to Tim. One question people had was sort of with regard to the layers. You were sort of mentioning that you output with all the layers just to have them in case you need them, but kind of which layers sort of natively go out in the render versus which ones, like the clown pass, are sort of only specific to trying to build out more complexity in something like Photoshop.
Well, yeah, so you can render out no passes, you don't have to render passes. But the ones that I think you should always render, no matter what, is the reflection pass, the ambient occlusion pass, the clown pass, the normals pass with camera space normals selected. And that by default, it's off. So that's something that you'll have to go hit that little cog and make sure that's checked. And I would always add to PSD. Otherwise, you'll get all the PSDs in one folder, and then you got to combine them yourself in Photoshop. Having this button here, KeyShot does it automatically for you and puts it in the different folders, so it keeps it organized for you. I hope that answered that question.
I think so. Yes, thank you so much. I mean, really, just great feedback, Tim, from all the content you covered here. So we are at the top of the hour here. So any parting thoughts for us on your usage of KeyShot 11, Tim?
Guys, it's powerful. I mean, the one that I love the most is you're able to paint now inside KeyShot. I've had a couple projects where I had to do some brushing, and then the edges around parts were brushed off, right? So that I had to make. How do you do that without doing a remapping UV map of part? So now that's inside KeyShot 11, I can actually go in there and I can paint just on those edges to make it look like it's been brushed off. The paint's been brushed off. Much easier now. So that in itself is a powerful move. But I've been using KeyShot from the beginning, and there's nothing out there that even compares in my mind when it comes to ease of use, the quality of work that you can get out of it. But really, in the end, that is a big benefit, because the faster you can work, faster you can get results, the more money you can make out there. And then I'll challenge anybody. You can use your own program. I'll use this program, and in the end, let's see what products look like. It's really the person behind it and how much fun you have. And KeyShot makes it fun. It's like a toolbox of all your paints and pencils, and you go and play, man. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tim. Again, really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you, everyone who registered and joined the webinar today. And yeah, as I mentioned before, make sure you follow us on social media to get more great content. And we hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.